Nigeria's public debt has risen to 44.06 trillion naira in the third quarter of 2022 as it continues with repayment burden. According to a press statement published on the website of the Debt Management Office, the total public debt stock rose from 42.84 trillion naira recorded in the second quarter to 44.06 trillion naira in quarter 3 2022, showing a 2.85% increase quarter on quarter as Nigeria acquired 1.22 trillion naira debt within 3 months. Now, the DMO said the increase in public debt was due to new borrowings by the federal government to part finance the deficits in the 2022 Appropriation Act, alongside new borrowings by subnationals. The current heavy infrastructure debt financing and the low productivity in the local industries is believed to be further straining the country's economy. So what can the Nigerian government do to actually reduce its debt portfolio, and what does that actually mean for the country's economy? Because some economists are saying that Nigeria's economy is going down the drain. And so we have an economist who is with us joining the conversation from London, UK, and his name is Gospel Obele, Chief Economist, Streetnomics. Thank you so much, Gospel, for being part of this morning's discussion.
Thank you for having me, Lekan. Good morning.
Now, before now, alarms have been raised. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, they have all warned about Nigeria's debt portfolio that has been on the rise. Even other financial institutions had raised a red flag about that. Now, could this have been avoided?
I mean, yes, this could have been avoided in many ways. Looking at it historically, it could have been avoided. What we have to a very large extent is a revenue crisis. The reason why the debt crisis is pretty obvious is because we do not have enough revenues to finance our debt, or we do not have enough public finance reputation within context. So there's been a history of fiscal indiscipline, and all of these narratives, inclusive of poor structures and poor policies and all that, have eaten deep into the Nigerian economy. Also, the extractive institutional language around investments, around revenue mobilization, and all of these things have impacted on the position of our public finance. As a result, the government at many levels, both federal and subnational level, resort to borrowing as a means to financing its policy and its projects and all of that. Not to say that debt is actually bad. Even the most developed nations in the world even have a higher debt to GDP ratio, have higher debt services and all that. But the construct is the fact that are we putting these monies into critical, scalable sectors that can help us gain the right investment, the right productive investment for the economy, and then in turn help us service and pay back over a period of time. So it's a mixed narrative. The big question is, should Nigeria be borrowing more? On the other flip side, our budget side is still very low, which is about 1/5 or 1/3 of the overall brand value of Apple, globally. That's really an interesting narrative there. So we need to think about ways we can begin to improve revenue and expand the Nigerian economy. We're still doing very little, when you look at it from the budget size perspective, overall budget size perspective, plus even the debt conversation perspective, and of course, as a result, the public finance / revenue perspective.
All right, before we start talking about what Nigeria needs to do in terms of improving its revenue, now it has been steered by 44.06 trillion naira in terms of debt. Is the Nigerian economy in jeopardy?
The Nigerian economy has been in jeopardy for a long time. We've just been patching things up and just been managing, finding a way to, as the layman would say, rough it. And you don't play such games with a very highly intricate and vulnerable economy like ours. All right, it's been in jeopardy for a very long time, not just across debt, across major sectoral blocks, across major economic indicators. All right, so we're getting to a point where if nothing is done, the economy may self-destruct, and all of that. And there are a lot of warnings out there to show that we need to act right now. So we've been in jeopardy for a long time. And I believe that the core fundamental narrative around this are the fact that there are heavy extractive institutional ideology that have hampered the budget to productivity dynamics, which is where, again, you have debt, misfired in terms of public finance expenditure instruments and all of that.
All right, what has been the standpoint of the government over time looking at the debt, the loans, and the borrowings? And are those standpoints justifiable? Would you say that they have viable or reasonable reasons for wanting to keep borrowing money to fund the budget? Or you would say that they've not been truthful to themselves in terms of their ideology or their rationale behind this borrowing?
To be very honest with you, I mean, the core of the Nigerian narrative is that to grow and develop, Nigeria needs to expand its investment into the economy, and that would technically mean a bigger or bigger budget sizes in the future, and larger budget deficits in the future to a very large extent. But then again, part of all these narratives can be managed better with improved public revenue. When the revenue position is being improved, and in terms of enabling and inspiring collection than enforcing more tax days and all of that. The question is, how do you expand the tax net in narrative? So there's going to be bigger, government budget sizes if investments must happen. As a result, the need to fix revenue, and if revenue is not being fixed, you find a situation where we'll have to resort back again to borrow it. So either way you look at it, borrowing is still going to be in the picture now and in the near future for the Nigerian economy. The big conversation is who is spending what and where. That's where the conversation is, all right? If that can be properly done within the eyes of inclusivity, within the eyes of productivity, then we'll begin to see improved returns from our debts. And as a result, debt will not be a major issue at the front burner, because once you begin to plug in these debts correctly, we'll begin to see the returns on both the Nigerian economy and as well as the public finance, going forward in the future.
All right, let's quickly touch on the areas that the Nigerian government has failed to explore in terms of generating funds. We've talked about tax. Let's look at all those sectors and all those areas. How do you think these sectors have the capacity to generate the funds that can help the Nigerian government galvanize and push its budget in terms of implementation that they actually are not even looking at?
Yeah, there are many sides to this. You first have the leakage block, all right? There are many leakages around revenue collection in Nigeria, so that needs to be done. Then the right enablers for doing business have to be in place so that more SMEs can earn better, can earn more, can do more for themselves. And once a critical chunk of your people, in terms of human capital, in terms of business productivity and all the likes, are really, really doing well for themselves, then it becomes a lot easier for them to comply. So we need to inspire and create the right incentives to grow tax compliance to a very large extent. Now, we've heard of recent CBN policies and how difficult the Nigerian economy is. The average Nigerian SME is already pressed and crunched, all right, in a cost of living crisis / cost of doing business crisis. Such an individual will be thinking more on how to, evade tax than even comply in context. I mean, this is the reality. So how do we encourage, people, and how do we do more around government being accountable and government really delivering results? Another block you want to think of is the fact that there's a strong non-oil economy that can do well for the government in terms of revenue. And these are low-hanging fruits. The non-oil sector contributed about at least 1.1 trillion naira more than an oil sector revenue in first half of 2022. So that's a low-hanging fruit idea. The big conversation is how do we unlock that sector in terms of organizing and formalizing or semi-formalizing engagements within the sector to ensure that you produce chocolates that are buyable in Zurich, in UK, and they're scalable, and they're growing returns for you in terms of foreign exchange receipts. So we need to begin to look at all these different blocks. By the time we begin to grow capacity, to deliver exchange across these value chain points I've mentioned, then we begin to secure the public revenue block, which to a very large extent will do well for our future public finance / public expenditure in context. Also to mention that there are a lot of Nigerian states that are not economically viable. All right, there is a lot of reforms that need to happen within the civil service, and all of that within MDA structures, because the budget as a financing instrument is only as effective and strategically relevant, depending on who is actually spending and who is spending on what in context. So if you begin to lead these monies to MDAs to spend and all that, weak institutionalized MDAs, you begin to realize that those monies go down the drain and they become unaccounted for. So we need to also reform the civil service to ensure that the chains are strong across all the value across every point, and they're also delivering in within the context of investable opportunities and sectors that would yield improved public finance in the mid to long term.
Some people have said that one of the loopholes is the subsidy payment on premium motor spirits, and there have been so many discussions as regards if it should be abolished or if the government should continue to pay that. Even as the federal government has said, that is one huge chunk of expenditure going out of its funds to subsidize the price of petrol for the populace. Is it time, or is it right for the Nigerian government at this time to say they need to remove that from their expenditure?
Even if they know it's time, they would not remove it now. Because between now and next year, we are dealing with a factor called political correctness. If once a subsidy is removed, in quote, if it really exists to start with, once that subsidy is being removed, you begin to realize that the cost of PMS will hit a market equilibrium in context. But market equilibrium, again, is a function of if you have your supply side properly secured. Again, our supply side is a function of how much you're being able to import and, dealing across the prices on the value chain of imports and the like. So once that happens, the average Nigerian will pay more, for PMS, and that's going to impact heavily on the cost of living and all that. And that's because there's a huge demand on PMS to even start with. So if the government of the day or future governments deal with power about 50%, if you make power available at least 50% better than it is right now, you begin to realize that Nigerians will have less business, going to the PMS stations. Because, the average household consumes over 20 liters of fuel every week, to even start with. Now talking of the average business person and the SME or, large-scale enterprises and all that. So we need to do more around revisiting the structural issues. When you fix power, you reduce dependence on PMS. When you fix your refineries, you begin to reduce your level of vulnerability, to international oil prices and value chain transfer cost and foreign exchange impact or availability impact on the price of PMS, which always gives argument to the subsidy conversation. So subsidy is really not the conversation; it's just a distraction on the table, and a reason why public officers are seeing that as a major point to sell out, reasons why debts are not performing and all that, or public finance are not performing and all that. So we need to do more around visiting the structural dynamics, as well as fixing the revenue side of things that needs to be working effectively. Also to state that at a level of scale, at a level of infrastructure delivery and all that, then the Nigerian revenue may not be enough to do that. So at that point, debts begin to make sense because you begin to see where those monies will be spent and the value all of those infrastructural expenditure would yield, for the economy as a whole. So there are different pockets to this conversation, but they are very interconnected, all right? But taking a more structural based approach to fixing the root causal problems would now, yield to some level of relief in the mid to long term. And this whole debt narrative will not impact us as bad as it is right now. Like I mentioned earlier, budget deficits are normal everywhere in the world. More developed economies have higher debt burdens and debt sizes, in fact. But the difference is that the structural block upon which value is being created and delivered in the economy thrives on an effective infrastructure machinery that's been developed both in the public sector and the private sector and in the social sector. And that has delivered to a very to a very high extent. And once that is in place in Nigeria, I don't think debt will be the problem any longer.
All right, before I let you go, Gospel, we understand that the federal government at some point launched a 100-year bond as a way of paying off its deficit over a period of time. Some people have said that that's a viable means of repayment, of meeting their financial obligation, and some people are saying that that will put a burden on the coming generations and will further keep Nigeria indebted for decades or for years. What do you see to that?
Yes, it's a mixed narrative. That sounds like an exit strategy for the government in context. But I agree it's sort of piling up some irresponsible some new responsibility for the next the generation to come. Also to say that you have a very worsening state of the Nigerian currency that's currently not dealt with. All right. So if the Nigerian environment does business in naira and revenues and all that does business, by the time you're ready to exchange and do all of it, make all these foreign obligations and international obligations as it were, you begin to realize that we are in a more precarious state than where we started. All right. So these monies can be paid off in a matter of 5 to 10 years from now. If the right structure, again, the right structural things I talked about earlier on, if those right structural elements are fixed, the economy, if you invest money in the right places and invest money in people, all right, you begin to realize that it will yield a lot of investments. And when those monies come back, you can use it, you can even offset more than you've planned for, as it were. So you can offset more and you can offset it quicker in a period of time. So the core here is financing for productivity. Anything less than financing for productivity is a waste of time and a transfer of fiscal indiscipline on the next generation to come. And again, I do also think the next generation of leaders understand the problem enough to begin to position in terms of the right knowledge, capacity, and institutional ability to drive those changes. I think the next generation is just seeking power and just making noise here and there. I do not think that they are strategically ready to plug into what is coming and to manage the crisis ahead.
Well, it's quite interesting, Gospel, that you are hammering on financing for productivity, even when the Nigerian government kept saying that every money that has been coming to the coffers, they have been expending it on infrastructural development. You talk about the Niger Delta Bridge and, all those kind of infrastructural developments to build and the roads, connect the road networks and all that. And they are saying that would actually improve on the economy of the country over time. But then, well, it depends on how viable and how financially rewarding those kind of investments will be, if they're actually investments at all. Thank you so much, Gospel, for joining the conversation.
Thank you for having me today, Lekan. Wishing you a great week ahead.
And you too. Now, the total public debt figure as of June 30, 2022 was 42.84 trillion naira, as I said earlier, and the total domestic stock as of September 30, 2022 was 26.92 trillion naira, while the total external debt stock as of September 30, 2022 was 17.15 trillion naira. That's having to break it down. And economists think Nigeria is is overdoing itself when it comes to plugging the funds in the areas that they need to, and they are not really redirecting their funds or focus in productive areas, just as Gospel Obele has said. And Obele Gospel said what needs to be done is to finance sectors and structures and areas that will bring about productivity. And I think that is what the Nigerian government needs to take a cue from if they're open to reduce the debt burden and, of course, improve the economy. Let's quickly go on this break, and when we return, we will be bringing you international business news.